Welcome to Freedom House Online. We love hearing what God is doing in your life. Email us at onlinecampus@thefreedomhouse.org. Also, to partner with us in making a difference in our world, you can give at freedomhouseOC.org. Let's jump into today's message. We pray it encourages you.
We're going to jump right in to our message here. I want to show you two parallels here. Okay, I want to show you two parallels. Is we have the women who arrive at a tomb to find something in it, but it's empty. Okay, Jesus rose from the tomb. The tomb is now empty. His body is no longer there. If we jump back to Judges chapter 6, okay, we jump back to Judges chapter 6 in verse 2, it says that the Israelites, because they were scared of the Midianites, or because the enemy that was against them was so intimidating, that they had to make for themselves shelters. And essentially, they had to make for themselves homes in mountain clefts, in caves, and in strongholds, okay, and in strongholds. Now, some of you may be familiar with what that word stronghold means, and there's two different meanings for the word stronghold. The first meaning of the word stronghold, which is most commonly used, is a spiritual stronghold, something that has a strong hold or a strong grip over your life. This could be an addiction, this could be a fear, this could be an insecurity, something of that nature. Could be worry, could be anxiety. It's got a strong hold. It dictates your life for you, okay? That is the spiritual definition for a stronghold. The physical definition for a stronghold is right here. You're like, no, that's the tomb. Yeah, that's what a stronghold is. A stronghold is like a cave, okay, or like a mountain cleft that there's a hole in it that is supposed to bring security. Okay, strongholds are supposed to bring security or to bring a shelter or a covering so that others cannot find you, so that you are hidden in that stronghold. So we have two different instances where we're introduced to a stronghold here. We have the stronghold that is known as the tomb that Jesus rose out of, and then we have the stronghold that the Israelites had made as homes and as shelters. You see, because the Israelites had been given a safer at home order, and so they were scared of the Midianites, so they're like, you know what, we're just going to hide out in this stronghold here. Now, as we continue on in Judges chapter 6, verse 11, it says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. It says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So Gideon, we're introduced now to Gideon. Okay, and Gideon and his family, they had been hanging out, they had been taking cover in one of these strongholds, okay, in this covering, in a place where they wouldn't be found by their enemy. And the angel of the Lord appears to him. He says, hey there, mighty warrior. Hey there, mighty warrior. And I want you to hear Gideon's response. He says, pardon me? He says, excuse me? He's much more polite than to just say excuse me. He says, pardon me. Very dignified. He says, my Lord. Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all of his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? Now, I said we were introduced to two strongholds, but there we were just introduced to a third stronghold. You have the stronghold of the tomb that Jesus rose out of. You have the stronghold that Gideon and his family had made their home. And then you have the stronghold that was over Gideon's faith. You say, well, how did we see that? Well, because Gideon's first response to the angel of the Lord is like, hold on, what did you call me? You called me a mighty warrior. If God is with me, then why is all of this taking place? And maybe, just maybe, that's how you're feeling right now. Maybe, just maybe, you feel like God has removed his hand from you. Maybe you feel like God has forgotten you. Maybe you feel like God has overlooked you. Maybe, there was, you were diagnosed with an illness, or you started getting a fever this week, or you started getting a cough this week, and so you began to panic a little, and you feel like, God, you're not covering me. Maybe somebody was diagnosed with COVID, and they contracted the disease, the virus. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's somebody in your home. And you're like, God, how could you possibly be with us right now? I know everybody says that you're with us, and I know they continue to preach through the screens that we got to have faith and we got to believe, but where are you? That was the question Gideon was asking, like, man, I don't feel like God is with me right now. I feel like he's as far away as can be. I know other people have said that he's come through and he's moved like this before. I know there's others that have said that, God, you came through and you brought healing to them, that you brought freedom to them, but I don't see it in my own life. And so you have the stronghold that Gideon lives in, and then you have the stronghold that lives in Gideon. I'll say it again. You have the stronghold that Gideon lives in, and then you have the stronghold that lives inside of Gideon. You see, Gideon had been running on empty. He didn't have the empty tomb faith. He had faith that was on empty. He had faith that had been drained out, that had been washed out. Not because there had been any harm to him and his family, but because the insecurity began to rise up inside of him. Because the fear began to rise up inside of him. Because he was beginning to get depressed. Like, God, are you ever gonna come through? Maybe right now you feel yourself slipping into a stronghold of worry, of anxiety. God, when am I gonna get out of this house? When am I gonna get back to being able to hang out with my friends? When am I gonna get back to being able to take my kids to the park, to take my kids to school, to take my kids to their baseball games or their football games or to their soccer games? And there's an anxiety and there's a worry. God, we had invested so much money into these things and now it's removed from us, and now you feel like you're going into a financial hardship and a financial stronghold that, God, I thought I broke this, and you begin to see yourself slip back into that stronghold. What stronghold have you found creeping up over the past 8 weeks? Maybe it's not directly from a diagnosis or directly from something practical that happened to you, but maybe now that you're forced to stay home, you're beginning to see that there's some strongholds in your marriage, some strongholds in your family. Maybe you have trouble sitting down and talking to one another. Maybe you have difficulty coming to solutions together. Maybe you feel a little anxious being around one another. Maybe you feel like your parents are overlooking you. Maybe you feel like your parents have forgotten you. Your friends that you used to hang out with on a daily basis, they haven't checked in on you. So now you're being intimidated back into a stronghold of worry, a stronghold of isolation, a stronghold that is messing with your mind and telling you that you're not worth anything. And so now the stronghold of self-harm and suicide is beginning to creep into your mind. Because the temptation that is now at hand is, well, if I hurt myself or if I take my own life, will anybody even notice? Because right now I feel like nobody notices me to begin with. And so coronavirus hasn't touched you physically, but it's put a stronghold on you spiritually to where now you feel trapped. Maybe you feel like you're missing out on some of those special moments that you're supposed to be having with your children. Maybe you grew up and the interactions and the memories that you have with your parents is being at the baseball field, and right now you feel like those memories are being ripped away from you, mom and dad. Maybe you feel like, young person, those moments that you're supposed to be spending with your friends, graduation and grad nights and receiving that diploma and receiving that degree, college student, and you feel like everything's being ripped away from you. And worse than not receiving a degree or not being able to take those prom pictures, now you're falling into a stronghold that has a hold over your mind, to where now you're even willing to forfeit your future because of the stronghold that has grown within. This is what Gideon was facing. How do we know that? Because his response was in verse 15. It says, "Pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? You see, the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon not to speak to his current situation. Okay, God knows what you're going through currently. God knew the feelings and the emotion that Gideon had in his current situation. He knew that he was timid. He knew that he was scared. He knew that he was anxious. But he said, I didn't come here just to appease your current situation. I came to speak to your future. Says, young person, I know you may feel like everything's being ripped away from you. Marriage, I know you may feel like your marriage is falling apart. But really what I've come to do is I've come to speak to your future. I've come to speak to the plan that I have for you. That if you guys can make it through this current situation, you're gonna see the mighty warrior that I'm trying to raise up. But Gideon had to first confront the inner stronghold that was taking over him. Verse 16 it says, or verse 15, continuing verse 15, it says, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. It says, God, how can you use me? God, how am I ever supposed to do anything significant? Everything that I'm supposed to be taking part in is being removed from me. Why do I feel like every time that something that is in my life is supposed to be celebrated, it gets ripped apart? It gets taken away. God, why do I feel like my marriage is falling apart? How's my marriage supposed to sustain for eternity if we can't even sustain through this stay safer at home order? We can't even survive through this COVID-19. How are we supposed to be a mighty warrior, God? So Gideon had this stronghold building up on the inside. What stronghold is building up on the inside of you? That you feel like canceling yourself out. That you feel like giving up. You feel like throwing in the towel on your future. On the purpose that God has for you. What stronghold has risen up that's intimidated you back into an even deeper stronghold? Stronghold of addiction. Resorting to alcohol or drug abuse now. Maybe driving you into debt because you feel like if you spend, it'll take your mind off of the current situation. You see, that's where Gideon found himself, is Gideon and his family, because of the oppression of the enemy. They had been intimidated and they had been pushed back into this stronghold. And the stronghold became comfortable. The stronghold became comfortable because it felt safe. Your addiction, it makes you feel safe because it blocks out everything else that's going around you. Going into debt and buying all of those clothes and buying all of those sneakers and spending all of that money, it makes you feel comfortable because it feels like maybe life is still going on as normal. But God's not coming to speak to your current situation. God's not coming to make this stronghold more comfortable. Jesus and his Spirit is coming to lead you out of the stronghold. To say, rise up out of the stronghold. The stronghold no longer has a hold of your life. The stronghold cannot control your future unless you allow it to. Unless you allow it to. You see, when the women came to the stronghold in Matthew 28, the angel told them the tomb is empty. In other words, what they were saying is the stronghold is empty. The stronghold is empty. And here's the spiritual truth for you today that I believe is going to encourage you, that's going to lift up your faith, and that's going to propel you to be an overcomer this week and to not slip further back into the stronghold. Is that when Jesus rose from the grave, that when Jesus emptied the tomb, he emptied your stronghold. That when Jesus emptied the tomb, I'll say it again, that when Jesus emptied the tomb, he emptied the tomb so that you could empty the stronghold. so that the power of the stronghold will no longer be able to keep you captive, that the stronghold will no longer be able to hold you back. It'll no longer be able to continue to tear apart your marriage or tear apart your family or tear apart your finances or tear apart your health, but that because Jesus emptied the tomb, you can empty the stronghold. Come on, somebody put in the comments there, I am emptying the stronghold. I am activating an empty tomb faith. Come on, say it one more time. I am activating an empty tomb faith. Now, I know at times it can be easier said than done. Okay, I understand that strongholds can be very real. And I understand that you don't always see the stronghold until you're in the stronghold. You don't always see the stronghold as being something that is holding you back until you're being held back. 5 years ago, my wife and I, we had our oldest son, Uriah, and at the time he was about 6 months, 7 months old, and we were now 17 weeks pregnant with our next child. Yep, we were gonna have Irish twins. I know, they were gonna be 12 months apart. 17 weeks pregnant, and I'll never forget the day, it was February 16th. It was Pastor Josiah's spiritual birthday, and it was President's Day. It was the Monday after Valentine's Day. And truth be told, we were actually supposed to go to dinner that night. And I had came home on my lunch break to eat lunch. And while I was at home eating lunch, my wife and I got into an argument. Okay, got into an argument. I left and went back to work. Okay, I didn't leave and was never coming back. I left and was going back to work. I get a phone call from my mother-in-law, as my wife was at my mother-in-law's house at the time, and I just remember so definitively the scream and the tone of her voice as all she could get out of her mouth was, the baby, the baby, the baby. My first inclination was Uriah, something happened to Uriah. And she's like, no, the other baby. And in that moment, I remember driving down Imperial Highway and my heart just sinking in my body. Like, oh no, this is not good. So I had made a quick U-turn and drove right back to my mother-in-law's as fast as I could. And upon getting there, I had learned that my wife's water had broke. And for any of you that are familiar with pregnancies, your water is not supposed to break at 17 weeks. Your water is supposed to break right around 40 weeks. So we weren't even halfway there yet. And so we rushed to the doctors. They started searching for a heartbeat, and they found one. Found a heartbeat. We're like, okay, good news, there's a heartbeat. Bad news is the water bag that held all of the amniotic fluid that feeds the baby was now ruptured and leaking and would most likely run out. They're like, but right now the heartbeat is still good and it's still strong. So we're gonna wait it out. So chances aren't good, but we're gonna wait it out. But for us, that was all we needed. Because we felt like, okay, well, God is with us. God is with us. God is going to heal this womb. He's going to heal the water bag. He's gonna miraculously just close it back up. We had found stories online and on Facebook where that had happened before. And so we're like, okay, well, surely God's gonna come through for us. I work for the church. I've given my life to ministry. God, I've laid down everything before you. Just come and heal her womb. Just come and piece it back together, God. And we prayed and we fasted and we would fall asleep listening to scriptures just being read through YouTube all night long. We'd wake up and we would pray again and we'd believe. And then Wednesday came. About 5 o'clock. We were debating, do we go to church? Do we not go to church midweek? And she began to get a fever. So we're like, okay, so we monitored it. Didn't go away. We go back into the doctor's office and I put her on the bed and they begin to look for a heartbeat. And they look And they look, and they look. And of course, the nurse doesn't say anything because she can't. We're like, no, it's got to be there. It's got to be there. And the doctor comes in, and doctor looks, and doctor looks, and there's no heartbeat. And in that moment, you feel like Gideon. Like, God, where'd you go? God, are you really with me? You begin to question every decision that you've made. Coming out of college, going into ministry, raising your family in ministry, building your marriage in ministry. God, is this really what you wanted for my life? Is this really the path you directed us on? To where now we're in a moment where we need you the most, and we feel like you're not even here. In a moment where all we needed you to do, God, we know it's in your power to heal that womb, and you didn't heal it. Now what? And my wife and I were backed into a stronghold. We were intimidated into a stronghold. Gideon and his family, they weren't forced into a stronghold. They were intimidated into a stronghold. For me and my wife, we were intimidated into a stronghold of worry. Like, what's going to happen the next time we get pregnant? And anxiety, should we even try again? Do we want to even get our hopes up? Because what if we do end up getting pregnant and then the same thing happens again? And you go into this stronghold of worry, and I could sense my wife kind of falling into a depression. I have a picture that illustrates it so well that I couldn't wait to post once we had more children. But we were in this fight together. And if we were going to be backed into a stronghold, then we were going to work our way out of it together. So I know what it's like to feel helpless. I know what it's like to feel like God's forgotten about you. I know what it's like to feel like he's overlooked you. Like, God, why is this virus now affecting me? Why is it affecting my workplace? I did everything right. I went through school. I got the degree. I submitted the application. I crushed the interview. I did it all. And now the job has just been taken away from me. God, why would you do this? God, I put in the sweat and the tears to build up this small business or to build up this business, and now all my revenue is gone. We gave. We sowed seed. We gave to the heart for the house. God, where are you at? And maybe that's what you're feeling right now during this coronavirus. You're feeling like, God, where are you? I know that you're calling me a mighty warrior, but I feel like you're nowhere near me. And I feel like I don't have the faith to live up to that. So where did you go? Our family was recently, I'll say it better. Recently, our family was given another enemy that attempted to back us into a stronghold yet again. So my mother-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer in August. Not only that, but it was a rare breast cancer that would require 16 weeks of chemo, that would require a surgery, and then possibly more chemo on the backside of the surgery. And the enemy tried to back us into a stronghold. Again, a stronghold of worry, stronghold of doubt. God, why would you allow this to happen to my mother-in-law? Why would you allow this, of all people, to her? She's the one that led us back to church 11 years ago. She's the one that kept us grounded in our faith. She's the one that kept us from not throwing in the towel on our faith. She's the one that encouraged us to pursue our dreams in ministry and to pursue everything that God had for us. Why her? Why now? Why? Why, God? But we refused to back in to that stronghold because we understood that Jesus emptied the tomb to empty the stronghold. And so we refused to stay captive in the stronghold, and instead we activated an empty tomb faith. Point number one is Jesus emptied the tomb to break the stronghold. Jesus emptied the tomb to break the stronghold. I need somebody to say, I need an empty tomb faith. I need an empty tomb faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, it says, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Somebody needs to say it again. They have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, that we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. When my mother-in-law had been diagnosed with her cancer, there wasn't just the stronghold of worry and the stronghold of doubt and anxiety, but now the anxiety and the worry began to bring up arguments. Now began to bring up discord within the family. But that was where we had to remind ourselves. That's where we need to remind ourselves, church. Encourage ourselves every day that the weapons we fight with, they're not of this world, but they have divine power to demolish strongholds and to cast down arguments. To demolish strongholds and cast down arguments. See, when my wife and I decided to start trying for another baby, we had to cast down strongholds, not once, but every day. Because you start to approach now week 12, and the stronghold try to rise up. Well, I don't know, is today gonna be the day that your water breaks again? Is today gonna be the day that you lose your baby again? And so every day we had to wake up and we say, we demolish the stronghold that is trying to keep us captive. We demolish the stronghold that is trying to keep us a prisoner to our thoughts and a prisoner to our emotions and a prisoner to our past. And so every day we would wake up and we would demolish that stronghold. And we would demolish that stronghold. And we would demolish that stronghold. Every day, every time my mother-in-law went in for that chemo, she'd have to demolish that stronghold of worry. She'd have to demolish that stronghold of anxiety. She'd have to overcome. Well, what if it hurts today? Well, what if I get sick today? She had to demolish the stronghold. As we continued on with our next pregnancy, we now got all the way to 40 weeks. So we felt like we had overcome strongholds. And then we got to the delivery room. We got to the delivering room, and you better believe that stronghold tried to raise itself back up against us. But this is what we knew, is Hebrews chapter 10. If you could put that verse up there, Hebrews chapter 10. It says, for yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But go now to verse 39. It says, but we are not of those who shrink back. You see, as we began to demolish these strongholds, we began to realize that an empty tomb faith allows us to rise up in faith. It allows us to empty the stronghold. And it prevents us from shrinking back. Because as we're in that delivery room, the stronghold tried to creep back in. The anxiety and the worry tried to creep back in. Because as we began to push and deliver our son Jedediah, as we were noticing that we would push and there would be movement, but then it would retract. There would push and there'd be movement and then it would retract. And as our son Jedediah finally came out of that womb, he came out purple. Blue as can be, like a blueberry. Cord wrapped around his neck, no cry, no breathing. But it was in that moment that we said, no, we demolish every stronghold. We demolish every stronghold. And so rather than our first step and our reaction being to worry or to panic or to cry, I grabbed my wife's hand and we began to declare life. No. This is our son. Jesus, this is who you give life to. And after about 60 seconds, I'd be lying if I didn't say it felt like 60 minutes. The doctors pumping oxygen, rubbing the blood in his body. We heard a cry. We heard a cry. But we had to refuse to shrink back. Freedom House, those of you that are logged in today, we have to refuse to shrink back. See, coronavirus, it can touch your flesh, but it can't touch your faith. It can't touch your spirit. It can't take your soul. Because when Jesus emptied the tomb, he emptied the power of depression. He emptied the power of anxiety. He emptied the power of death. He emptied the sting of death. He emptied the power of fear over your life so that you could rise up and not shrink back. So whether you contract the disease or you don't, whether you contract the virus or you don't, you can stand firm and say, even if I know who holds my future, I know who dictates my destiny. Young person, your future hasn't been written off. You haven't missed the most important moments of your life. Married couple, this isn't the end for you. This isn't the final end of the story. This is just the transition to the next chapter. And I believe that the chapter that God is writing in all of us out of this nation and out of this world is that we're going to have an overcomer spirit. That there's nothing that's going to be able to back us into a stronghold any longer. Because if we come out of this as a church, if we come out of this as a community, if we come out of this as a nation, then what could be against us? What God is doing right now in the stronghold, what God is doing right now in the Safer at Home, is He's reminding us. He's reminding us that His faithfulness, that His goodness, and that His purposes, they outweigh and they outlast any pandemic. They outlast any depression. They outlast any anxiety. And it always outlasts any fear. It always outlasts any fear. Point number 2. An empty tomb means go. An empty tomb means go. Fast forward now to our final pregnancy. That's right, I said it's our final pregnancy. And we're in the delivery room. And it's our first girl. And it's our last child. And we begin to push. And there's movement. And there's a retraction. And there's movement, and there's a retraction. And I turned to my wife, and I said, honey, we've been here before. I said, honey, we've been here before. An empty tomb gives you a faith to tell others that they could have faith. An empty tomb reminds you that there's no stronghold that can keep you from the purpose and the destiny that God has for your life, for your marriage, for your family, and for your future. Who in your sphere right now, who in your circle do you need to reach out to and say, hey, you may not have faith right now, you may not have peace right now, but you could latch on to my peace. You could latch on to my faith. Let me help you. Let me encourage you. Because I know what it is to overcome some strongholds. So let me help you overcome this stronghold. Let me help you overcome this insecurity. Let me help you overcome this isolation. Let me help you overcome this situation that you're going through with your marriage. Let me help you overcome this situation that you're going through with your children. Let me help you get through the situation that you're going through at work with your coworkers. Who is it? Who is it that's directly linked to you? that the freedom from their stronghold could be directly linked to you sharing the gospel with them today. Matthew 28, verse 9. I love what verse 8, what the women did. They came to the tomb, but the tomb was empty. And the angel of the Lord told them, he ain't here. It's empty. He said it's time to activate that empty tomb faith. The tomb is empty, so that means it's time to go. And so what did they do? It says they departed quickly from the tomb. They departed quickly from there to go tell the disciples. They didn't say, well, we'll just wait for next weekend because maybe he'll end up back here. They didn't say, oh, well, we'll wait for the pandemic to be over, then we'll invite our friends to church. We'll wait for the pandemic to be over, then we'll send out a text message to our friends and our family members and our coworkers. No, they departed quickly. They took action quickly. God rose you out of your stronghold. God has given you faith in the midst of your stronghold right now, not to just keep it to yourself, but to go and tell your friends, to go and tell your family, to go and tell your coworkers, to go and tell your neighbors, to go and tell your community, to go and spread it all over your Facebook and all over your Instagram, that though coronavirus may have us in a safer at home pandemic, we are safest at home when the Spirit of God is dwelling inside of us, and we refuse to go any longer without having the Spirit of God in our home, without having the spirit of worship at our kitchen tables, without having our families united again, without having our communities reunited again, and with no longer living in disorder and disunity. The empty tomb means go. It means go. Not out of your own strength, not out of your own power, but because the weapons that we fight with demolish strongholds. The weapons that we fight with prevent us from shrinking back. And they push us to step forward. They push us to step forward. I believe right now God is rising up mighty warriors. And I know maybe you don't see yourself that way, but neither did Gideon. And Gideon would overthrow the Midianites, and he would lead Israel back into the driver's seat to become a nation that would be feared. So you may not see yourself as a mighty warrior, but God is rising you up to be a mighty warrior, to not shrink back, to not get stuck in hiding, but to rise up and bring revival to a nation, to bring revival to your neighborhood, to bring revival to your schools, to bring revival to your family, to bring revival to your marriage, to bring revival on the inside. No longer being weighed down by the insecurity, no longer being weighed down by the fear, no longer being weighed down by the depression or the anxiety, but to rise you up, to be used as an extension of His grace, as an extension of His power, as an extension of His peace. Which acquaintance do you know? Who in your phone book right now needs to receive a text that just reminds them that they're not forgotten, that God is still in control, that Jesus still reigns, that evil has not won, that evil doesn't even have the upper hand, but that there's a peace. There's a peace that we find in the empty tomb. There's a peace that we find that brings us victory, that brings us strength, that brings us comfort, that doesn't allow us to stay stuck, but causes us to rise back